Well, I thought in light of the theme of the conference, I would focus during my presentation portion on the discovery of life on Mars, where we're at after 2 years now of investigation of what's up there. Then like to open it up to questions, and I'm expecting a lot probably about Pegasus rather than my Mars material. But I thought that I would just establish the fact that Mars is an inhabited planet. We now have not just substantial evidence of that, but I think evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And so I just thought I'd march through and sort of summarize what we found. I continue to receive data from a growing cadre of research associates around the world now. There are a number, for example, of photographs of humanoids that have been derived from NASA's photographs and the photographs of the European Space Agency that we haven't even published yet. Okay, so we've not only made the linkage between the humanoids that live primarily underground on Mars and the overwhelming artwork that we see that litters the entire surface of the red planet, but we have now identified that the humanoids on Mars are in fact the makers of the carved statuary, which is so ubiquitous on the red planet. So I thought I would move rather rapidly through the Mars presentation. We have some time limitations, and then open it up to questions, primarily I would assume about Pegasus, but also feel free to entertain any questions. I'll entertain any questions you have regarding my Mars findings as well. In the first part, we're going to look at the discovery of life on Mars. Mars, as I said, is an inhabited planet. Evidence that Mars harbors several types of human beings, numerous animal species, and elaborately carved statues is contained in several NASA photographs that I analyzed last year in PIA 10214 and PIA 11049, which are essentially westward views and southward views of the Columbia Basin taken from the western edge of the home plate plateau by NASA's rover Spirit in late 2007. They were sent back to Earth in early 2008, and I spent many thousands of hours in 2008 analyzing the data and found, as I said in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars in 2008, essentially a cosmic treasure trove of images of humanoid beings, animal species, and carved statues on Mars. A little bit about my background. I was one of America's early time-space explorers, as I described on Wednesday on Coast. Officially speaking, it was from 1969 to 72 that I served in DARPA's Project Pegasus, although the first time I teleported on behalf of the U.S. government was during the 1967-68 time frame, and we know that dating is reliable because when we teleported to Santa Fe, my father and I, and then drove over to meet with Dr. Harold M. Agnew, when he was then director of the W Division, the Weapons Division, at the Los Alamos National Labs, there was a discussion between my dad and Dr. Agnew, and Dr. Agnew looked over at me and said, "How old?" And my dad and I answered simultaneously, 6. So we know that meeting with Agnew took place between September of 1967 and September of 1968. I was born in September of 61. And that's also a means that we can use historically to establish that physical teleportation via vortal tunnels propagated by Tesla energetic arrays was already a technical proficiency that had been accomplished by the U.S. Department of Defense by the 1967-68 timeframe. Officially, I was placed in Pegasus in the fall of 1969 as a 3rd grader and involved primarily in teleporting back and forth between New Jersey and New Mexico and some future locations, because of course to teleport back you need team members in the future to send you back to the present. And also I described, maybe a little bit less on Wednesday, the different probes of the future that in the past that we took in a virtual form of time travel via the chronovisor. So those were the major emphasis of Project Pegasus. I think it was as a result of those experiences that in 1981 I was essentially requested, almost urged, by Courtney M. Hunt, who was the CIA agent they placed in my life in the early 80s. Throughout June of 81 he was asking me, "Do you want to go to Mars?" And I said, quite frankly, no. I didn't really want to leave Mother Earth. And he said, "Well, you have to." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the survival of the human race on Earth depends on it." And I really don't know what he meant by that. He was just speaking of the general proposition that we're going to have to be courageous enough to leave our home planet as astronauts or chrononauts in order to secure our home planet here. Or maybe there was some more elaborate stratagem involved that centered on myself. I just simply don't know. He basically told me, well, get ready because you're going. You can't really talk us out of it. And so those two teleportings that took place in July and August of 1981, when I was 19 and going to UCLA here in Los Angeles, were undertaken by Jump Room. They were at essentially a CIA facility in El Segundo. We went up via elevator up to the 5th floor, checked in at a kind of a desk there, a counter, kind of like a Fijian suite that you'd have in a law firm. My name was provided to the one person who was working there, and then Courtney said, well, Andy, why don't you step in the teleporter? And I said, where is it? I was familiar with essentially the elliptical-shaped teleporters that had existed at Curtiss Wright when I was a child. And he said, we just came up here, and it's the elevator. And so I walked back in the elevator. The elevator went up to about the 8th floor, and Courtney said a couple times on the intercom, are you ready? And I kept on saying yes, and I was getting exasperated with him. And I finally said, light this candle. And then essentially I felt a great deal of pressure. The elevator began to morph into more of a cylindrical shape. And those journeys took about 20 minutes to reach Mars. As a kid, we were just jumping in seconds back and forth between suburban New Jersey and Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is a little bit anachronistic at this point, but I just wanted to point out that my discovery of life on Mars has been the target of a disinformation campaign, essentially defaming me and distorting my evidence. Let me just cite one example. They had Ray Villard, who's the news director for the Hubble Space Telescope, he's a NASA employee, allege in a 3,000-word hit piece on the Discovery Channel website, which is supposed to embody the highest level of science writing in the world, quote-unquote, if Basiago has found evidence of little leprechauns on Mars, why doesn't he show any of them in his writings? Well, that's what my writings have been about. So this presentation is about 6 months old. I was still sort of wrapped up in the fact that they were spending your tax dollars to defame me, an independent whistleblower and attorney at law. And I think I've advanced the cause of science by deriving this data from NASA and the ESA's own photographs. Your tax dollars are being spent essentially to defame an independent researcher who has found evidence in NASA's own photographs that Mars is an inhabited planet. Now, why is this going on? Well, the cover-up of life on Mars is obviously linked to the quantum cover-up, because we've been going there via teleportation since at least 1981. We may have been going earlier. I was involved in 1981. So when as brilliant a researcher as David Wilcox states that there are now 600,000 U.S. personnel up on the red planet, I can't discount that, because when they sent me up 28 years ago, there were already human beings up there. On the first teleportation by myself, I was greeted by 3 young adults who were CIA personnel. They were human beings from our civilization that were already up there. The second time when I went out with Courtney Hunt, there was a man that we talked to in a building that was about a half a mile from the skull that I walked out through the eye socket of from the underground location. And he was also a CIA agent, personnel of our civilization here on Earth. And so I think they're very phobic about even discussing the fact that Mars has an indigenous ecology and civilization, because they don't even want us to think about the fact that there are living humanoids on Mars, both from our own civilization and from the primarily underground civilization that exists on the red planet. Several days after I published my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, in 2008, actually it was 4 days later, I was contacted by a career CIA officer. In fact, she's the niece of the man who introduced Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger as friends, a woman by the name of Virginia Olds. And Virginia passed along information from the CIA that the CIA estimates that there are about 1 million humanoids living in the primarily underground civilization on Mars. So I can't confirm David Wilcox's estimate that it's 600,000 U.S. personnel on Mars, but it certainly is, you would presume, would be numerous at this point, 30 years after I was set up there as a 19-year-old. In a breakthrough that occurred just several months ago, one of our most gifted ufologists, the great Bob Dean, revealed this photograph of presumably a U.S. base on Mars, while appearing at the European political summit in Barcelona. I find this kind of interesting because the underground location that they teleported me to was essentially sort of like a concrete bunker, very much like the rooms that you find one level below a baseball stadium. It was basically a deep underground military base type construction. And this, to me, somebody with 2 master's degrees in urban planning, looks like it could possibly be a cement, organic type of structure that could have been readily poured by human personnel from Earth on another planet. Why am I speaking out? I'm speaking out because I believe that as the natural heritage of humankind, human beings on Earth have a right to the truth about the natural history of the solar system that we inhabit. Now, my paper, I do believe embodies a breakthrough in science. There were 50 discrete discoveries that were achieved in the paper. I know that it's a significant writing. I'm not boasting, I'm simply saying that this is part of the story, because when I was permitted to read my paper in 1971, and also to see the photographs, my dad and the other people involved were very excited. They were sort of preparing me relative to the significance of the discovery of life on Mars in the same way that they've been preparing our presidents. It was sort of like, get ready, you're going to be involved in something significant in the future. The paper itself contains highly significant data. It's the first data from Mars to contain images of humans and animals. The beings in the data are captured in their natural living state. The paper contains the first images of humanoids living in their natural state of existence on another planet. And it also shows the beautiful colors of Mars. Mars is spoken of as the red planet. It's difficult to pick up on this projection here, but it's also a place of beautiful turquoise colors, pink. Here's a pewter head of a child that you can see jutting out of a cliff right there on the home plate plateau. So it was because of the significance of this data, in terms of the paper containing the first images of the ecology and civilization of another planet, that I wrote the president of the National Geographic Society in December of 2008, asking him to publish my findings in our leading geographic journal in the world, a journal that I've been reading since I was a small boy. And at this point, a year later, almost a year later, I've received no response from the National Geographic Society, despite the fact that they stated in a special edition published the month before I published my paper that space is the once and future frontier of the human race. My paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, analyzes a single photograph. I mentioned it's PIA 10214. I think it's the most significant photograph that has ever been taken by human beings from Earth, because in it we cross the threshold that separates our past as an earthbound species from our future as a spacefaring civilization in contact with extraterrestrial species. So it's a very, very significant photograph. Can you see any life forms this far out with this degree of compression of detail? No, and that's why NASA is placing its panorama shots from Mars in such a concentrated way on the internet, because just as if we were to park our car and look out at the San Fernando Valley, we wouldn't be able to make out individual features. The discovery of what this photograph contains had its roots in the public scrutiny that this anomaly here attracted beginning in January of 2008, when PIA 10214 was beamed back to Earth and placed on the internet. It's the apparent form of a human female jutting out from the far left edge of the home plate plateau. Like many Mars anomalies, I wondered, is this a natural rock formation that just emerged spontaneously? Is it in fact a statue of a female figure? Is it a fossil of a humanoid being that was fixed in place? Maybe somebody was being chased by a larger creature and was somehow crystallized there in some way? Or is it a shot of a living being traversing the cliff? I concluded that this is almost without question a statue, because it possesses 8 characteristics that any art historian or archaeologist would recognize as statuary. First of all, it's standing on a pedestal. It embodies highly articulated human form that nature seldom, or even I would say probably has never produced naturally on Earth. There's duality in the sense that there's 2 human figures in the same location, which we have never found on Earth as a result of natural forces. The two figures correspond orthographically in the sense that you could put them together as a common statue. One side plugs into the side of the other form. Clearly gender is present. There's a male and a female figure indicated. They are clothed. They show movement, at least